Yeah, yeah. I think so. Hey, man. How you doing? How's everything? Hey. How you doing? How's everything? All's well? Good. Good. It's been a while. Yeah, it's been a while. You don't hang out in County Hall? Hey, how you doing? How's everything? Yeah. Everybody get settled in. Let me know when we're ready to continue. Once again, good morning. I told you that was going to be an exciting day, and it did not disappoint. Of course, I want to thank Commissioner Carver. When she came in, that's when the alarms went off. Let's give her a round of applause for being here. And I think it was a way to try to send Charles off with a big blast, a big bang. With that, we're going to continue. We were going to have Q&A at the end, but with the interruption at this particular point in time, I'm not sure how much we're going to be able to do. So we're going to continue at this particular point in time. Once again, let's give Sasha Page a big round of applause.
So I think somebody overcooked the lasagna and the smoke detectors went on. I'm gonna jump ahead here. I think the bottom line is that what's important to understand is that this project was financed, even though it had some real estate-related revenues associated with the financing. The lenders were comfortable with this, partly because of the backstop of Denver, and it was financed. It's been a very successful project, and the loans have been paid back. So it's a great story to follow, and one that hopefully we can consider here. Far west in San Francisco, they're building a $2 billion transit center for high-speed rail, light rail buses. It's also financed through tax increment financing and some land sales, and a naming rights deal with Salesforce.com. They're paying $100 million over the next 25 years to pay for the O&M of this large facility. Again, another example of how a major player, a major private company in the community has put their name on something like this, and it's going to work out to help fund this big project. More in the middle of the country, in Missouri, in Kansas City, Missouri, a little bit less than 3-mile streetcar was funded very much with special assessment districts and value capture monies. This is kind of the kitchen sink of value capture. It's included a special assessment district on residential, commercial, and nonprofit buildings. So schools and churches are paying as well. a sales tax dedicated just in this corridor, and parking assessments as well. It's also a very successful project. They're now looking to expand this streetcar. So another example on a much more modest scale of how these value capture innovative finance revenues can work. And then back to where I'm from, Washington, D.C., maybe more in the scale of where the ambitions are in Miami, is they built a almost $6 billion rail to the Dulles Airport, the Dulles Metro Rail, funded by about 20% using value capture, primarily a special assessment district. And the reasons are pretty simple. The county is highly rated. This is, if you ever drive in from the Dulles Airport, there are a lot of these Fortune 500 companies that adorn the buildings along the way. And basically, it's a cost of doing business. The developers and the tenants there said, look, to make this work, to appease the major landlord, or the major tenant in town, the federal government, we have to have transit to our offices. To attract that millennial engineer, he or she doesn't want to drive, they want to bike, they want to walk, or take transit to work. They also were able to get this special assessment district, which is basically, as I said, an additional tax on the property, because the county agreed to upzone the major stations around around the major stations, and maybe not quite as tall as some of the towers in Brickell, but they're going to have some very tall buildings around these stations. They're also going to get rid of parking minimums. They're going to allow land use integration, so there'll be a lot of mixed-use activities. It's really going to be a city in this area, which was a classic office park that was absolutely dead after 5 p.m. So that quid pro quo with developers, now we talked about that yesterday in the session in the afternoon. Upzoning is very important to make the real estate work in these value capture projects. I'm going to go back to, and then here's an example of how the Dulles Metro Rail was funded. It was, as you can see where the check marks are, that was funded through these value capture monies. And aside here, this project was also funded 50% from toll revenues on the Dulles Metro toll road. And I think there's a parallel here with, obviously, with MDX. This is an essential benefit to this toll road, taking some traffic off the road, and therefore the toll road felt it was appropriate to share in this, and that could be an option here for some projects. So let me conclude here with one other sort of tidbit here. Many of these projects were financed through what's called a TIFIA and RIF program. These are federal programs that provide low interest and very flexible loans. Miami is not a stranger to this. Miami financed the Miami Intermodal Terminal and the port using the TIFIA loans. This could be a nice vehicle for some of these projects. In addition, the RIF program, which is a sister program to this, not only could finance transit improvements around stations, encouraging transit-oriented development, but also potentially developers, commercial and residential developers, along the Northeast Corridor or any rail project could potentially obtain RIF financing for projects that benefit rail stations or rail corridors as well. And that's a program that unfortunately expires in 2 years, but it's available. It's a very attractive way of financing, and hopefully folks in the region will take advantage of that. Well, good. I want to conclude there and look forward to any questions. Thank you.
Next, we're going to hear from Eric Singer. Before we do that, I want to recognize, where's Secretary Wolf at? Secretary Wolf, let's give him a big round of applause. Secretary of FDOT, in order to be successful, you've got to have good state partners, and FDOT and the Secretary, they are good partners. I saw Javier Rodriguez with MDX here. Let's give Javier a round of applause. Again, another good partner. The next individual that we're going to hear from is Eric Singer. He has focused his practice for the past several years in the areas of government procurement and complex government transactions, including public-private partnerships. Eric combines that practical experience with extensive academic knowledge gained as a visiting faculty member and research fellow at the New York University School of Law, where he studied P3s across the United States and abroad. In order to further his clients' goals, prior to joining Wolfson Sundberg, Eric also served as a law clerk to the Honorable Danny J. Boggs of the United States Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit. Eric handles full-spectrum public contracting issues, from preparation of proposals to appeals of administrative bid protests, and has represented clients on some of Miami's most transformative public-private projects. For example, as part of securing a $300 million Metro Rail contract for an Italian company, he defended a bid protest appeal to the Federal Transit Administration. Without further ado, let's welcome Eric Singer, Esquire.
All right. Really a pleasure to be here. Exciting panel and hopefully no more interruptions. I will try to be as brief as I possibly can as a long-winded lawyer to try to get us back on track. All right. So we heard a lot about some innovative finance mechanisms, and I want to talk a little bit about how public-private partnerships might play a role in being part of the lasagna that Commissioner Moss discussed in terms of funding the SMART plan. So very briefly, just to try to define what a public-private partnership is, or a P3, and it's something that it's sort of a buzzword we've heard a lot about in recent years. Just a couple key points. It's not privatization. It's not the sale of a government asset to a private company. So I think the only example of a purely private public transportation system I can think of is the Las Vegas monorail. That's completely private, not a P3. It could be an interesting model in part for the SMART plan, but not a P3. And it's also not a ordinary government procurement contract where the government pays money in exchange for goods and services. So, for example, the new Metro Rail cars, not a P3. The county, with FTA funding, paid for the new cars, and there's a lot of creep in the definition of P3. And what it really is there's this middle ground between those two poles of a pure government contract and a purely private development, where they divide risks and they divide responsibilities, and hopefully something magical happens. So I'll be very brief here. I think the key point for a P3, if you're asking a private company to take some risk and to finance it and hope to get they're going to need to know that they're going to get a return on their investment. So they really need a stable revenue stream, and there's a couple ways to do that. A couple ways to simplify that we'll get into, but just in general, fares are a key revenue stream for mass transit, and value capture, which we've just heard a lot about. There are some other things that you can sprinkle on the lasagna, like advertising on the cars, but that's not. I guess that's more like the bay leaf. It goes in there, and you don't really know what it does. It's not going to be a big piece of the financing picture. So, for example, the New York subway, nearly $3 billion in fares a year, $60 million from its advertising contracts. So, we got to throw it all in, and in order to make it work. But the key pieces are value capture, and there's a number of ways to do that, and fares. All right, so we've heard a lot about Denver, and I'm actually going to talk a little bit about Denver. But P3s are thought of something new and exciting. It's important to keep in mind that sort of nothing is new under the sun, and the P3 model is actually a very old model. Up until the Great Depression and the New Deal in the 1930s, most public infrastructure in this country was provided with what we would now call a P3. So the model's been around a long time. I think that should give us comfort that it's something that works. It's worked for many, many years. It just didn't have a cute name until recently. And I want to talk a bit about the New York subway, both because it's the largest mass transit system in this country, but also it's sort of an analogous situation. So in 1913, there was already a New York mass transit system. It was a backbone. It went mostly through Manhattan. Manhattan was becoming very congested, and it was important for the city as a matter of planning to connect Manhattan to the outer boroughs where more and more people were living. And I think this is a very familiar situation to what we have now. We have a metro rail, it's a backbone, but it doesn't connect to the growing municipalities out west and down south and up north. And so what they did is they turned to a P3 model, and the system, it was referred to as the dual contracts because they had two providers, two private partners. They negotiated the routes, and they did this in a way where there are always going to be some routes that you know, like from the airport to Miami Beach. You know that people are coming into the airport, they want to go to the beach. You know that's going to be a busy route. You know that going to Doral is going to be a busy route. You know that going down Kendall is going to be a busy route. And then other routes that are more aspirational, where maybe the infrastructure's there, maybe there's room for the areas to grow, but the ridership isn't going to be there today. And the way they solve for this problem of meeting current needs but also future growth was bundling the routes in a way where each private partner would get a busy route, and then they would also get a light route. And so they would sort of cross-subsidize their own projects by bringing in the revenue from the busy route, and now even if they weren't making a profit on the slower routes, on balance, they could make it work. This was actually one of the largest infrastructure projects in U.S. history. It cost more than the Panama Canal to build, which was built at around the same time. And it was on time and essentially on budget. And I threw in my favorite lawyer word, essentially, but it really was, I think history buffs will note that the contracts were signed in 1913, and 1914 was World War I. And all of a sudden, laborers who would otherwise be working on the system were off to fight in a war. So costs did increase, but it wasn't a radical amount. And for the most part, that considering, the project was really on time and on budget. 300 miles of track in just over 3 years. They structured it in a way to maximize private investment, where the private investor, the revenues were, the distribution was tiered. It was a waterfall where the private investor would get paid first, and then the government, which issued bonds and kicked in some money as well. Then the government got paid, and then if there were profits left over, they would split them pursuant to a formula. The big private funder was J.P. Morgan, not the bank, but the actual guy, J.P. Morgan. Last bullet there, I think there's also a lesson here for us. Fares were fixed at 5 cents forever, for the life of the contract, which was 49 years. And ultimately, after a few decades, the deal unraveled because of that. Is that in 1913, nobody thought that inflation was going to be a big deal, and then you had World War I, and you had the Great Depression, and you had World War II, and all of a sudden the 5 cents wasn't anywhere close to paying off even the first tier of the waterfall, and the deal fell apart. So how you price fares, and it's a difficult problem because the government wants to keep fares low, and the private partner, if they're being paid from the fares, wants to be able to set the fares so that they maximize the revenue. And That's a problem we can solve for, but it is a problem. So you've heard a bit already about the Denver Eagle P3 and the way that Denver solved for that problem. And I think we should be very excited about Denver because it's you know, I'm excited about the New York subway too, but Denver is a very recent, very functional, it's now operational project, and you know, it's an example we can point to. If they did it, we can too. Now the financial picture for Denver is a little different because they had about 2/3 of the cost. They had $1 billion grant from the federal government, and so they used the P3 for the balance of the 1/3 for the financing. That may not be the situation we're in with the SMART plan, but the way they solve for the revenue is what a lot of P3s are using, and it's what's called an availability payment, where the government sets the fares, and they can set them as low as they want or as high as they want. The government keeps the revenue from the fares, and then they pay what's called an availability payment to the private partner. And it's just a steady stream, and what they're paying for is to make the train available. So if nobody rides it, the private partner still gets paid. If the government wants to set the fares as free, the private partner still gets paid. And if a whole lot of people ride the train and it's a huge profit maker, the private partner still gets paid, but just that flat amount. So that provides sort of the stable stream that a private partner wants, but there are some downsides to it, in that to the extent that the service, if the private partner could provide better service and get more ridership, they don't have an incentive to do that. They just want to, the incentive is to sort of do what the bare minimum in order to meet their availability standards, and then get their payment. And then also, if there's room for being creative with setting fares or operations, then there's no incentive for that either. And that opened in 2016. All right. And so what I'm referring to as the gold standard of mass transit P3s, the Hong Kong MTR, which I think has a lot of pieces a lot of ingredients that could go into the lasagna, and that's the main model is called what they refer to as Rail Plus property, and what the concessionaire, the private partner, is given a line that's drawn on a map, and they're also given property adjacent to the line. And that's how, and then they build out the line, they operate it, they maintain it, and then they get to build private developments at the stations. And what they do is they actually integrate the stations into the development. And I think we'll hear a little bit more from the next panelist about how that can work here, how that has worked here. But they'll have stations where literally you have to go into their mall in order to go to to get to the train. And so they're able to generate a lot of value, a lot of profit from those joint developments, and that helps fund the train. They also use techniques of having first-class cars. So they have two different fares depending on what kind of service people want. I mean, much like an airplane. And so the one on the left there, you can see, is sort of the coach, for lack of a better word. And on the right, you're not packed in. You get to sit down, and people are willing to pay for that. And as a result, it generates more revenue. And 185% fare box recovery ratio, which is how mass transit systems are measured, and that's the comparison of revenues from fares to the operating costs. So they're bringing in almost double their operating costs in fares. Our system is something like 30%. I think the BART, Bay Area Rapid Transit, is about as good as it gets in the U.S., which is about 80 or 90%. So I think point is mass transit routes can be profitable, and they have a 30% profit margin, including the actual the debt service on building out the system. And when I say 30% fare box recovery, that's just talking about operations. It's not talking about the cost of actually building the system. So a number of techniques there that are used to have a 99.9% on-time ratio. And the last point there, I think, is the most important, is that a potential downside of P3s, putting more and more responsibility on the private sector and more control on the private sector, is that the government sometimes feels that they're no longer able to meet their public policy goals. So many jurisdictions have reduced fares for the elderly, for example. And if you have a private operator who's able to set fares, there's a concern, well, you know, how can we still take care of our citizens who can't afford not only the first-class car, but can't afford the coach? And what they do in Hong Kong, because everything's electronic now, as it is here with the card, the government will pay the subsidy directly. So everyone has an account, and if you're eligible for a subsidy, the government just puts that money in your account. So the private operator is still able to set fares at an efficient level to maximize the revenues to pay for the system, but the government's still able to subsidize. And so I think that's an elegant solution, and the types of solutions that we should be thinking about when, if we're looking at a P3 for the SMART plan. And I believe that's my last slide, so I hope I was speedy.
Next, we're going to hear from Kieran Bowers, who leads the company's U.S., or Swire Properties, who leads the company's U.S. development and investment operations. He has worked in the Swire Group for 18 years, holding different management positions in Japan, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Saudi Arabia, the Netherlands, and Hong Kong. He joined Swire Properties in 2008, serving positions in office leasing and development and valuation in Hong Kong. Prior to taking up his current role, Kieran was General Manager of City Place in Hong Kong and General Manager of Indigo in Beijing. A chartered surveyor, Kieran is a member of the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. So without further ado, let's give Kieran a big round of applause.
Well, good morning. First of all, Commissioner Moss, fellow panelists, thank you very much for that introduction. I should probably start out by saying there's a little bit of a misrepresentation there, in that whilst my title is President of Swire for the USA, it's actually could be distilled further to probably President of Miami or probably President of Brickell. It's a fairly narrow scope that we tend to invest in at this point in time. I'm very glad Eric touched on Hong Kong, because I'll be bringing quite a lot of that into this presentation. But just to really talk a little bit about our company, and that will give you the context really for some of the points that I mentioned about Miami. Swire Properties is Swire Properties itself is now sort of 40, 50 years old. Swire Group itself is 200 years old. It's still family controlled. It's now in the 7th generation of that family. So it has a generational mindset to investment rather than a periodic mindset. And you'll see that come through in some of the slides I show. For Swire Properties, our investment criteria is very much contingent on developing around major transport intersections. It's absolutely key that any investment we do is connected in some way to public transportation, and whether that's in Hong Kong or whether it's in China, and also our project here in Brickell City Centre, you'll see that same theme running through all our developments. This picture on the left there is really one of our major commercial districts. Pretty much all those buildings you see were developed by Swire. It sits actually in between and on top of two subway stations. And this is one of the major commercial hubs of Hong Kong. It has about 8 million square feet of office, and the metro is integrated into that development. So you can leave your apartment, go straight into the metro system, leave the metro system, all undercover, air conditioning, walk up into the office, straight into your office. And that's not unique in Hong Kong, to be clear. That's just the way that, you know, Hong Kong likes efficiency. It likes that pragmatic approach to leaving your apartment almost as well, being able to just get in that system and then you pop up in your office building. We operate in very large population densities. We now have 5 projects in China, 2 in Beijing, 1 just recently opened up in Shanghai with another one under development, Chengdu, Guangzhou, and the 2 major developments we have in Hong Kong, or 3 I should say, City Plaza, Taikoo Place, and Pacific Place. Just to give you a sense really of those densities, Beijing probably has a population of around 22 million people in its greater catchment area. Hong Kong around 7 million people, Hong Kong Island itself around 3 million people. Probably just to really illustrate the point that Eric was making, this is an example of one of our premium developments in Hong Kong. It's mixed use, because that's principally what we focus on. So that's a blend of retail, office, hotel. This one doesn't particularly have residential, but quite often now we're putting residential in there. You can see that basically the station is integrated in by this long walkway in one office tower, and then on the bottom picture you can see you just come straight off the platform and then walk into the development itself. I'll talk a little bit about how they charge for that, but basically it's through a connection fee. The ridership levels, I think as Eric expanded on, are very high in Hong Kong because obviously there's not many places to park cars. Cars are heavily taxed, it's very expensive. So public transport usage is very high, and it spans from the subway to the buses to the tram system. So as a result, you pay a premium to connect into that infrastructure. I was telling one of my panelists today that I took the Metro mover here from Brickell City Centre, and perhaps, you know, rather uniquely as any other metropolis in the world, I would have had to fight for space. I was the 4th person on the platform at 8:30 in the morning. I don't think you see that in Hong Kong. You don't see that in Tokyo or New York, that's for sure. So that's something I think that's a challenge for people to change that habit and mindset and be more reliant on public transport. Again, another example of one of our developments that connects directly into the metro system. So a little bit about what we do here in Miami. This is Brickell Key, of course. We first started developing here in 1980. So we're coming up to nearly 40 years of being in the city. We consider the city as a partner. The city has been very good working with us on bringing and importing some of our development techniques from Hong Kong into Miami. And we continue to build on that partnership, both at the county level and obviously at the city level. Brickell Key, as you can see, has undergone quite a transformation. I think there's now 14 towers, principally residential, but also has the Mandarin Hotel, which we retain 75% of. Brickell City Centre, we started assembling the site in 2008, 2009. We actually started construction in 2012, beginning of, and completed and began opening the last part of that centre in 2016, which was the retail segment. You can see on the left what Brickell City Centre, the site was in 2012. Last time I showed this slide, there was a member who was who basically had membership of the small tennis club you can see on the top right-hand corner. He was probably I would say the most resistant to what we've done there because he quite enjoyed playing tennis in downtown Brickell. But you know, I think what we've done and what we tend to practice and what we call in-house is creative transformation. What we do is we try and develop communities. We normally take parts of the city that have probably been not had much focus on for a period of time, invest heavily. We do large scale, so this in total is 5 million square feet. It's a large check to write. It's $1.5 billion US, possibly still one of the largest private investments in the US. And we develop and bring our operation expertise and marketing. Of course, the mixed-use model itself is also very helpful. You're not going to go too wrong with having an office component in downtown Brickell. Obviously depends on the cycle. Introducing residential. Clearly now there's been a pattern of residential development in Brickell, so it's part of a livable city. Residents want retail. They want that practicality. They want the restaurants, the cinema, the proximity of all that. So retail then feeds off the residential. And the hotel as well, you know, for a corporate district, hotel makes a lot of sense. So they actually form their own little microeconomy and support each other, as well as being relevant to that particular district. Just a little bit about most of which I've touched on. So there's 260,000 square foot of office. It's anchored by Ackerman, WeWork, McKinsey, KPMG. So they're quite significant corporate brands that have taken up office space with us. 780 condominiums, of which 75% have been sold and closed. We still have work to do on the other part. East Miami Hotel, which opened in May last year, basically is a total of 389 rooms if you include the serviced apartments. It's more a business and a lifestyle hotel. And the retail is about 500,000 square foot, has Saks Fifth Avenue, Cinemex Cinema. It's pitched at basically aspirational luxury or luxury level, but also has a Zara, 2 Italian food halls. And, you know, in testimony to really the way the retail world is going now, a lot more emphasis on experiential retail, entertainment, F&B or food and beverage is about 22 to 23% of the mix there. So that's really where we see the retail market being. It's less about fashion now. It's much more about what people can experience. Obviously, connectivity. As I say, look, I mean, public transport really is fundamental to our thinking. Here in Miami, you have the choice of the Metro Rail or Metro Mover. We integrated into the Metro Mover for pragmatic purposes, and also that's where the available land bank was. But obviously, we're connected to the major roadways as well. Again, just reverting a little bit back to Hong Kong. I mean, the way that Hong Kong is developed is that you'll see somewhat representative of maybe an ECG readout, if anyone's had one of those, where you'll see along a public transport line, you'll see a very tall spike in the density of building and in the heights of buildings that basically sit on stations. And then that density will decline and it goes low rise, and then again, where you see a station, you'll see a big spike. This is obviously something that you don't see much of here in Miami. As I look down the Metro Rail, I don't see development on or around the Metro Rail, which I think is something that, you know, should definitely be on the radar screen of planners. And that's again where the Hong Kong model is so successful, in that developers want to and pay a significant premium to be developing on these stations and integrating into these stations. Similar in Brickell City Centre, if you buy a condominium in Brickell City Centre, you can go down to the lobby, you can walk across the retail, all undercover, go into the Metro Mover station and head either north up to downtown or south into the financial district, all under one roof. And again, you know, you would hope to see that a financial district, instead of coming out of onto a station and a roadway, you connect that station into these office buildings with bridges. And that sort of overcomes one of the obstacles to public transport, which is, you know, the weathers, the elements, and air conditioning for the summer. For our investment really in the Metro Mover station, again, and it reflects very well on our partnership with the county. The station, as you can see on the left-hand side, before we started building, what we did is we basically removed the station. We put the station and integrated the station onto the second floor of our retail, and redesigned the station so that it had a bit more of a seamless feel to what we were doing in the rest of the development. So the architecture looked a little less municipal. We were fortunate to get the branding of the station as well as Brickell City Centre Station. And so now you can arrive on that station, you come out on the platform, you take an escalator straight up to the retail. But it's not just about, that was all with our own dollars, actually. It was about $9 million US that we spent on that project. So that's how serious we take it. It's not just about, building it into us. You've got to have some benefits as well to the community and surrounding area. We invested quite a lot of money into developing the landscaping underneath the Metro Mover station to make that a small little park. We are investing further in that because there seems to be a very strong movement towards dog ownership and less so in car ownership in the millennial generation. So I think integrating a dog park seems to be very strong on our residents' minds. And we hold a farmer's market under there as well. And clearly you get the benefit of some cover because it's under the Metro Rail, but it's activation. Some people do like this experience on a Saturday morning, going out and trying something that you don't find in your Publix or Fresh Market. This gives you a sense of what it was before we started investing in the landscaping and before we started trying to activate the space. And again, it's all private money, but it's something that clearly is not entirely altruistic. It does have a benefit for us. It does help improve the whole aesthetic. It does give you a sense of that you're in a very different zone or threshold. But clearly, the picture on the right is something people would much rather see than it being a dumping ground like the picture on the left. Just one project I would like to touch on because I think it sometimes falls a little under the radar screen when we talk about macro infrastructure. The underline, Swipe Properties has so far contributed $600,000 to the underline. You'll see it sort of, obviously, I think, get a little bit more higher profile as we move forward with some planning fees and development fees going towards this project. This, in our mind, is going to be one of the transformational projects, as well as the smart plan, but on a smaller scale, obviously, to Miami, is making Miami a livable city. I think it's a fantastic vision, and it will be up there with the underline and with the Atlanta Greenbelt in terms of defining this city. So I strongly encourage anyone in the room to look at it and take an interest in it. I think it'll start construction, or the beginning part, which will be at the backyard of Brickell, will start construction in the middle part of this year. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Can we get these? Okay, there we go. Fantastic. We've got a little time, and so we're going to entertain some Q&A. We've got two mics. We'd like for you. Are you going to take the mics to them? Okay, the mic will be brought to you. Please use this time to ask questions. We've already had the presentation, so we're just asking folks to basically use this time to ask questions and direct your question at one of the panelists, and they will respond to you.
Raise your hand if you have a question.
Got a question? Raise your hand. Okay.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. They were all very good. There's a decided lack of green space in downtown Miami, except on the bayfront. What is the plan in this city for dealing with that and making sure that developers that put up the high rises put green space around their buildings? Thank you.
Anybody want to tackle that?
Sorry, is this working? There we go, yeah. I think it's, developers realize that green space or being near green space is a great sales point for any development. And, we've done a lot of study on this in Hong Kong. The premiums you can charge for having an outlook on green space or having green space as an amenity is considerable, and it is part of our design philosophy to integrate it where we can. It obviously needs to be useful green space. I think it needs to be well designed, well thought of. Good public space or private space that has public access is really important to any growth of any city. Now, the city also needs to, I think on the planning side, consider how they allocate space for development and keeping these pockets of green. You know, London is a good example. It has an incredible number of parks of varying sizes, which are maintained and held by the city. And I have to say, as a newcomer here, I'm overwhelmed as well by the amount of green space that I do see dedicated, you know, not far from the downtown area. But to your point, you know, density will grow, and I think it's something absolutely needs to be on the planner's mind, because it will make Miami, as I said about the underline, a very livable place. And dedicating public land to that cause is key for Miami being successful.
And I know from a governmental standpoint, you know, that certainly that's something that we take a look at, and it's good to know that developers now see that as an asset. You know, the green space is something that's important to your tenants, and so, you know, moving in that direction, I think we'll continue to see that happen, you know, here in Miami-Dade County. I wanted to, before we go to the next question, introduce Eileen Bouclé, and she's the head of our TPO. Give her a round of applause. And I just want to make one other quick comment. You know, when Kieran was making his presentation and you saw the two slides, the one slide where you saw the trash and litter and those kinds of things, I chair Neat Streets Miami. And Patrice, where's Patrice? Is she here? Raise your hand. Patrice used to be the manager of Neat Streets. And the bottom line is, if we're going to be a world-class community, what Swire did in terms of that area in Brickell, we've got to do that all over Miami-Dade County. I mean, from one point to the other. We can't be a world-class city if we allow the litter, the trash, the unkept, you know, maintenance, and those kinds of things to exist. And so that's a commitment that we all have to make, you know, whether it be public partners or private sector partners. We've got to address that particular, you know, issue.
Good morning. I'm very interested in what the promises that Dade County made to elderly, to people with disabilities, people that need to get around and they don't have a lot of money. I don't have money for bus or train or, and I need to get to doctors, hospitals, medical appointments, just move around. I would donate my time to a disability organization. I wouldn't be able to get there. And while these projects are really nice, I can't see myself being able to live here, not afford to move anywhere else. And I just want to know, my golden passport, is it going to work? Or do I have to walk through some place and pay to get on transport? Whether it's a bus or a train, I use them all. Okay. And basically my rent is so high, it's $1,000 a month, and I'm only on Social Security, so you know I'm really in a bad place if I can't get around.
Well, let me respond to that. I mean, that's the reason why we implemented the Golden Passport, to try to help seniors out as it relates to providing opportunity for them to have mobility around the county. You know, that will continue. I mean, how this new sense of funding is going to play a role in the future, I'm not so sure right now. But certainly we've always had our eye on trying to make sure that our seniors have an opportunity to have access to transit and mobility here in Miami-Dade County. Commissioner Carver, you wanted to?
Thank you, Commissioner Moss, and to our panelists. So, you know, I've been on this journey with the Board of County Commissioners and the TPO for quite some time, and it's really exciting to see it coming together. I do think that this panel raises a whole area of inquiry that we've not discussed at the TPO, which is exactly what would private financing look like in the mix. And I know, of course, Sasha had brought us through the CITT some of these models, and we visited other places to learn about them, but still, I find it very challenging to think how all of this can be integrated in a comprehensive way. You know, it's not 1913 in New York City when one financier can really dictate how to couple up a high-performing and a low-performing route to get maximum public benefit. But I think that is a lesson that we want to take going into this. And also, we're not Denver right now, where we have a massive commitment of federal funding that we can use to leverage. So this is really more a question for you, Commissioner, and maybe Eileen can pipe in. How do we see bringing all of these things together into the mix that will be the financing for our big plan? And how can we also incentivize more developers like Swire to see that benefit? Because it's not just transit, let's say, it's not just converting those who don't understand the value of transit to become transit riders. It's also persuading businesses and developers that this is a real opportunity for them. Yeah.
And that's the big challenge for us here in Miami-Dade County, and for so very long, we felt that we were paralyzed and we could not move forward because we did not have all of the funding commitments in place. I think that what Denver did for us was to at least give us, you know, some sense that, you know, if you're creative and you work hard and you stay together, which is another issue that we need to basically talk about, you know, that you can get some things accomplished. We have what I consider to be a doable financing plan in place. It's going to mean that all of our partners are going to have to work with us. For example, FDOT, we're going to be relying on them, being able to utilize the resources that our citizens voted on here in Miami-Dade County toward the construction of these transit expansions. You know, that's a very important thing. P3s, densifying, as Karen was talking about, densifying areas along the transit way and providing opportunities for developers to come in and to basically do some value-added developments, you know, in those particular areas. It's going to take that whole lasagna approach, and I think that probably you're going to probably hear that from Eileen, you know, in the next panel, that type of thing, you know. But I have a sense of hope in this community, you know, that we can begin to deliver on some of the promises that we made, but it's going to take all of us working as a team. And in the past, one of the big problems that we had is that, you know, we were divided. You know, everybody was kind of trying to look out for their own area or interest or line and that sort of a thing. You know, after the Denver experience, you know, we came together as a commission, you know, and as a TPO, and we said that we were going to, you know, move forward with the SMART plan. And we have to stick to that, you know. But again, there are a number of different funding opportunities. The TIF, all those things would go into that lasagna as we talk about, you know, in order to make some things happen. You know, South Dade is a great corridor to do all of those things. You know, North Dade is a great corridor to do all of those things. And again, I think the key is us staying together and trying to make sure that our partners, convincing our partners, you know, that the investment would be a good investment. Okay, with that, we're going to close out this panel. Let's give our panelists a big round of applause. Thank them for being here. And I'll turn it back over to Charles.
So housekeeping, everybody take a quick break while we reset. There's some coffee. There are restrooms right outside. And let's try to get back in 10 minutes, and we'll start our next panel, which I think will be fascinating. Thank you, Commissioner Moss.
You're a sky places we've grown, all of us are done for. And we live in a beautiful world. Yeah, we do, yeah, we do. We live in a beautiful world. Bones sinking like stones, all that we fall for. Places we've grown, all of us are done for. And we live in a beautiful world. Yeah, we do, yeah, we do. We live in a beautiful world. All that I know, there's nothing here to run from. 'Cause yeah, everybody here's got somebody to lean on. I used to rule the world, seas would rise when I gave the word. Now in the morning I sleep alone, sweep the streets I used to own. I used to roll the dice, feel the fear in my enemy's eyes, listen as the crowd would sing. Now the old king is dead, long live the king. One minute I held the key, next the walls were closed on me, and I discovered that my castle stand upon pillars of salt and pillars of sand. I hear Jerusalem bells are ringing, Roman cavalry choirs are singing. Be my mirror, my sword and shield, my missionaries in a foreign field. For some reason I can't explain, once you've gone it was never, never an honest word. And that was when I ruled the world.
All righty, if everybody could get settled, we'll try to start in just a few minutes. good for the environment, all that. All right, if everyone could be seated, we're going to be getting started. Where we sit? Here comes trouble. Who are we missing? Kylie. All righty. Thanks to an excellent panel. Thank you, Karen. That was great. We need more SWIRES in this community with that sense of community and sense and contributing. Thank you. All right, so this is our final session. We thought we'd, I was going to say close with a bang, but we kind of did that halfway through the first panel. But first, I'd like to introduce a couple of my board members that are here, trust board members, Glenn Downing, Prakash Kumar, and Oscar Brainin. Thank you all very much for being here. We heard yesterday, and I just want to make a few comments, and then I'm going to exit stage right, stage left, and Javier is going to take over the rest of the session. In order to get something done, we need two critical elements. We need sustained political leadership. I think with the Maurice Ferrés of the world and the Dennis Mosses of the world and the Daniela Levine Cavas of the world, I think we are cultivating that. But the other thing that we really need is we need sustained, strong professional leadership. The professionals in the community need to contribute and continue to challenge, to come up with ideas, to come up with viable solutions. And what you see represented in this panel is really the best of that professional leadership. They all get along, they're all incredibly talented, creative, they collaborate. I think there's not a sense of turf. You know, we've all worked together. I guess I've been this latest round doing this for 8 years, but people like each other, they call each other up on the phone, they help each other. But it's really that professional leadership that is going to set the stage, hopefully, that will make the SMART plan and all of those other concepts be realized. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Javier Betancourt, who's going to moderate this session. And we really thank you for your participation in the summit. Sir.
How about another round of applause for Chaz? He talks about professionals. He is the epitome of a public servant and a professional. Many people, when approaching retirement, will bolt for the doors and head up to Nashville as soon as they can. He made a conscious effort to stay another month to help me transition in and to try and pass on as much of his knowledge as he can. And I am truly and personally grateful, Chaz. Thank you very much. Don't change your phone number because I'll be calling often. Thank you. Happy to be here with you today and happy to be taking on this great challenge. I do believe, as many of you do, that the stars have finally aligned and we are in a great position to really move transit and transportation forward in this community. A big part of my optimism is the folks you have sitting here, true professionals, committed to the cause, and creative and passionate, and resolved to get it done. And so between that, our wonderful elected leadership, our great civic activists who play an important role in all this, I really think we have momentum, and it's something that we need to continue. With that, I'm not going to get into individual bios because these folks are so accomplished and have so many great credentials that we could spend the entire afternoon simply discussing their backgrounds. And plus, I think the bulk of the people here already know them. So I'm going to make this very kind of clean and simply introduce our speakers, allow them to come up. I think most of them have a presentation for you. And then if we have time, we'll have some Q&A. Our first speaker is Eileen Buckley with the Transportation Planning Organization at TPO, formerly known as the MPO. Eileen was most formerly with FDOT, brings a wealth of knowledge to the table, but what I most appreciate about her is her passion. And the little I've known Eileen, she clearly demonstrates that passion in everything she does and is a great inspiration to me personally. So Eileen, you have the floor.
Thank you, Javier. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. I have a PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to be as brief as possible because, like you, I've been attending and listening to all of our outstanding speakers, and I kind of want to have this more of a let's get real session, and I want to kind of get to your questions. So I'm going to try to get through my PowerPoint as quickly as possible and not repeat a lot of information you may have heard. But just to give you background, as you've been hearing the SMART plan over these 2 days, the SMART plan was set into motion in February 2016. The Transportation Planning Organization unanimously adopted as the highest priority rapid transit and transit supportive projects in Miami-Dade County. So that focus was early on in 2016. That was followed by unanimous adoption of the SMART plan. Anyone here familiar with the BART system that was mentioned on the last panel? Who's been on BART in San Francisco? How about DART in Dallas? All right, so we followed very successful models, and we brought that model here at SMART. It's not just the Miami area transit, it's strategic, and it's a comprehensive program of projects, and that's what you need to enhance mobility in any major metropolitan area. So this is where I want to focus a little bit. There was a question earlier from one of my board members, Danielle Levine-Cava, one of our champions on our board and in trying to advance mobility with our partners, and her question was, talk to us about funding. At the end of the day, that is what it all comes down to. So this slide is critical. This is a milestone moment. In June of 2017, 6 months ago, the Transportation Planning Board unanimously adopted an allocation of funding, a specific pot of funding called Federal SU, Federal Surface Funds. Starting 2023, for a period of 30 years, the board will be allocating $30 million a year over a 30-year period. In addition to that, $75 million was set aside in the upfront years for design right-of-way acquisition. So that's just short of $1 billion over a 30-year period. I think a lot of folks here may be familiar with some of the other projects that our speakers spoke about from Denver and even internationally about P3 and other kinds of financing tools, value capture. All of those require local funding commitment on the table, and that is what the TPO Governing Board did. But I also want to highlight something very unique to us as a state in the state of Florida. We have a very unique partner with the Florida Department of Transportation in that all of the other cities that were mentioned to you earlier, none of them have the program that we have here in the state of Florida. In the state of Florida, we have the companion of the New Start, Small Starts in our Florida statutes, which says that the state will participate with 1/2 the non-federal share. And I can tell you that when we visited California, Texas, and New York, and we happened to casually mention this type of statute that we have, they were all amazed and in awe and quite frankly shocked that we have the potential for this type of partnership with the state. These other states don't have that, but we do. That is an advantage, and that is why we not only value our partners at the state level, but we're following the process and we're hand in hand in putting together the program of projects. So what I have up on that matrix in front of you is really the #1 and #2 priority, again, unanimously adopted by the TPO Governing Board, #1, #2, both SMART Plan, and all of that is funding. So the most important takeaway here is to understand that the TPO board has put that first wave of funding commitment on the table. That is considered our local commitment, and with that, we can go and seek partnerships once we obtain our environmental clearance from the agencies. There is a video embedded here, but it was shown yesterday. I'm gonna skip over it. It's on our website, miamidadetpo.org, because I wanna continue through this presentation. This slide basically is showing you the demographics of Miami-Dade County. The SMART plan was laid out in corridors that have long been known that will have our future population and employment growth. What's really important about this is to understand this graphic about our population, our 2.7 million residents here. We have a higher, significantly higher than national average of inter-county travel. And that means that, and if you fall into this category, please raise your hands. We wake up in the morning in what is considered our residential district, our commission district, but we have to travel outside our residential district to another commission district or another district for employment. So we don't live and work in the same district. How many of you wake up in the morning in one district and travel outside that district for your employment every single day? All right, I'm with you on that. So you're not just traveling from district to district, you're crossing through multiple districts. These are invisible lines. It should be seamless, it should be integrated, it should be connected, and that is what the SMART plan seeks to do. We need viable mobility options. What's our statistic? We're in the mid-70s. Nationally, that statistic is in the low 60s. So we have a higher average here in Miami-Dade County, thus our traffic. And all of you that raised your hands just a moment ago, how many of you experienced congestion during that? How many heavy congestion? Raise both hands. How many of you have a transit option? You have a transit option. All right, okay. We want everyone to raise your hands in their workforce commute corridors. We want everyone to have an option for transit. This graphic is great because it really highlights a lot of the points that you heard today over the last 2 days. The TPO Governing Board has authorized and initiated a very unique effort. We're the first MPO, TPO in the state to do this. We are actually conducting an implementation plan on all 6 rapid transit corridors. And what that means is we have a focused initiative on land use and zoning along all 6 of our rapid transit corridors. We're working closely with the county, the municipalities, and the agencies to make sure we're planning for the future land use density, first, last mile connectivity, so that any investment we make on our rapid transit corridors go hand in hand with appropriate land use, affordable housing, first, last mile connection. We want to make sure that we're going to get the biggest bang for our buck on our investment on these corridors. And we know that if we can establish appropriate density mix, appropriate commercial, residential, park, recreational land uses along the corridor, we're ensuring a feeder pattern well into the future and getting our dollar back, our value capture on that program. Now, that's the orange box. The green box signifies the environmental documents. That was mentioned yesterday and earlier. I understand, I hear the comments, and I understand the frustration and statements about studies. However, in order for us to be able to apply for and obtain new federal and new state transportation funds and bring them here to South Florida, we have to comply with regulations. We have to obtain environmental clearance and obtain federal and state authorization on our project documents. I can tell you that we have been working diligently on that since the adoption of the SMART plan. And what I see coming this year in 2018 are some decisions regarding mode, technology, and the solidification of some of the land use visions on the corridor. And most importantly, what I see in 2018 is a better understanding of what level of partnership we're going to have from the state and federal government in terms of funding. We want to maximize our partnerships and therefore maximize our funding, be open for public-private concepts, and move our plans forward. So with that, I'll step aside for the next speaker. So hopefully we can get to your questions as soon as possible.
Thank you, Eileen. Our next speaker, Secretary Jim Wolf with Florida Department of Transportation, District 6, is someone that I've gotten to know originally at the DDA when he was in a different district, and we were looking to implement bike ped improvements. And, you know, let's be honest, FDOT doesn't always have a reputation as a bike ped-oriented agency. It's been historically focused on moving cars because that's what moves the most people. But we found in Secretary Wolf, again at the time at a different district, a champion of bike ped issues. And I understand he's also a champion of transit. And so we welcome him to our district. He's been here a while now. And at this time, I'll welcome you to the podium, sir. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to be low tech. No slides. I'm just going to chat about some things. Interesting to hear Eileen come up first, and that was appropriate because the TPO sets the agenda. They set the priorities. They, in large degree, FDOT is a funding partner. We don't own and operate transit systems, but we're there. We're an asset that helps get it done, and we depend on the TPO priorities. If we didn't have county and TPO and local priorities to expand transit, FDOT wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be part of that story. And of course, I'm confident that the county and TPO support for mass transit is very well justified. And I would say that because you're right, most people rely on highways for transit. About 95% of the commuters in this county are on the highways. And unfortunately, 79% of our commuters are alone in a vehicle. And that's a serious problem. We currently experience traffic congestion most of the daylight hours, particularly bad during the peak periods. And I don't see that going away with the current formula and the direction and what you might project. Our population long-term is projected to grow at about 1% per year. Our ability to add highway lane miles, a measure of our traffic carrying capacity, it's about 0.5% per year now, and probably going to be falling more like 1/4. We're largely built out in our highway system, and a lot of our significant projects now are about completing our express lane network and doing interchange ramp type improvements to squeeze the most we can out of a system that has pretty much reached what it's going to be. So how do we deal with growth? We also need to deal with upcoming technology. And I'm sure that ride on demand has already been talked about here, and it was great to go through the exhibit hall and see Freebie. Did anyone go there? I'm sure you did. And it's great to see the private sector stepping up and starting to provide these services that are based on new ideas and new technology. But ride on demand and then ultimately autonomous vehicles. Did anyone note, by the way, that GM announced this week that they will, by next year, be producing an autonomous minibus that has no steering wheel or controls? The future is actually here. It's going to be growing on us gradually. But if you told me 10 years ago that GM was going to produce a vehicle with no steering wheel, I would have been a little bit skeptical. But we're becoming acclimated to those ideas. Projections about the impact of new technology on transportation are all over the place as far as whether it's going to be 5, 10, 15 years that we're going to look dramatically different. But it's going to happen. It is there. It's on the horizon. It's going to happen. And one of the things that I'm confident that we will see as we get more ride on demand and autonomous is more vehicle miles traveled. So that formula that says we get 1% more population per year, we're going to get 1% more demand is wrong. It may be that over the next 20 years we add 50% lane miles. Just if you make a service cheaper, more convenient, more people will use it, and we'll get more traffic. So we as transportation planners need to fix the part of the equation that remains to us, and that's occupancy. That 79% in single passenger vehicles is our biggest opportunity. That number needs to go down. And of course, the SMART plan, providing fixed route transit, is a vital part of that. The first and last mile, like Freebie does, to get people from where they're starting to the fixed route transit, and then from there to their final destination, that increases the convenience and the time. Time is the biggest factor in choosing whether people can take transit. How long will it take them to get there? What will be the convenience? What will be the cost? We need to be finding scenarios in our partnership that answers that question and provides a transit service or a higher occupancy service that people will select. The agenda said I was going to talk about the Smart Plan projects that DOT is managing, and we're managing 4 of them, 3 that have rail options and Flagler that is only express bus option. But you know what? We got boards over here. We have a table in the exhibit hall. We have some great handouts. You can pick those up and you can look. And we're also doing Kendall and 27th and the Northeast Corridor on the FEC. Well, Kendall, 27th Avenue, and Flagler have a feature in common in those studies. They all presume that a 6-lane divided roadway will give up 2 lanes of automobile traffic and turn it over to either express bus or rail. And this is not something that you're going to find a track record for doing that. Taking highway lanes away that are currently already congested. We're going to take those away and give them to transit. That's an interesting proposition, and I support it. I want to see this happen. We're not making the numbers work unless we get ridership up that has better occupancy percentages. 2018 is a year of decision. All of those projects are going to be going to a lot of public meetings, then finally the public hearings, and finally the debate at the TPO for the locally preferred alternative. And decisions will be made whether we're going to do that, what the projects are going to look like. So this is a great year for that, and if you want to be involved in that process, be involved. My biggest concern about all the project development that's going forward is that they need to have a full dialogue. People need to understand what the alternatives constitute, what are their strong points, what are their weak points. We need to make the right decision. We don't need to have people find out after the decision is made what the features are. So this is a very important year for us and our partners. With that, I think I'm probably close to my 10 minutes, so I'll turn it over.
Thank you, Secretary Wolf. You know, ultimately, we have to ask ourselves why we're here and why do we do what we do. As public servants, certainly in my profession as an urban planner, my goal is to build livable communities for people. And that point of for people was emphasized yesterday by Mayor Gilbert, excuse me. And livable communities includes transportation, but it's not the sole component of what creates a livable community. There's housing, there's economic development, environmental concerns, health, safety, recreation. And what I appreciate most about our next speaker is that she sees that bigger picture, and she sees how transportation is but one piece of the puzzle that together creates that bigger picture. And with that, I'll ask Alice Bravo to the podium. Thank you.
Thank you. It's great to be here today, and I want to thank all of you for coming out and taking an interest in this hot topic in our community right now. And certainly, I'm going to go through the slides, but I also want to give you guys insight as to what goes into this process that we have embarked on with the SMART plan and the studies and the decision making and the funding and what the ultimate outcome is going to be. So I'm Director of Transportation and Public Works, so we own and operate the transit systems here for Miami-Dade County. And I think the experience of operating the Metro Rail over the last 34 years is also an important factor in the discussions that we have as we move forward with our corridors. So interestingly enough, I came across a report from 1992 that was created by the MPO, and it talked about what's next after the Metro Rail, and it laid out several corridors. And a lot of those corridors look like a lot of the corridors in the SMART plan. You know, so I think as we embark on this conversation, it's important that we be very practical and very real about the funding and the timelines and what it takes to deliver these projects that are complex. Because ultimately, that's how we can get on a path and a course, and that course might be a decade or two to accomplish these goals. But the most important thing is that we come up with a plan and we stick with that plan. Because when you see the cities that are successful in implementing their transit systems similar to the SMART plan, they're very faithful to that plan over long periods of time. And so we really need to think about this longer horizon. You know, we've talked a lot about, in the last day or so, about the type of transportation we want to have. And in some of the conversations, you know, we've talked about what we need in order to move people and give mobility options. And in the conversations, we also talk about attracting development. And so I think that's where we also have to have a very real conversation about the funding that we have and what's the most urgent issue. You know, is it providing the options? What level of project provides the options that will help people move around versus what we would do if we had a lot more funding and wanted to turn these projects into economic development projects. So as we talk about transportation options, Eileen asked, who has a transit option near them? And very few people raise their hands. But when you look at a map of Miami-Dade Transit and where all of our bus routes, everybody really does have a transit option. The issue is that when we think of the bus routes, you think of a bus that's stuck in traffic, so that doesn't save you time. And on top of that, the bus has to make multiple stops. Well, if you're in your car, you don't have to stop, and you get to carry your stuff with you, and you can talk on the phone and have a private conversation. So the bus is a transit option, but it doesn't provide the features we all crave. And we as a society crave convenience. You know, who has a smartphone? All right, you have that because it's convenient. Who goes through a drive-through? Because it's convenient. You know, so for a long time in the transit world and early on in my career, I would hear things like, well, let's stop funding roadways and that way we'll force people to use transit. Well, guess what? This is America and this is a democracy and you can't force people to do anything. What you have to do is offer a product that people will want to use, not that you're gonna force to use. You know, so our goal for the current Miami-Dade transit system is clean, safe, and reliable. Our goal for the SMART plan is to help people save time. Using transit is perceived by some as less convenient, and that's why I'll ask somebody, do you use transit? And they might say, the thought has never crossed my mind, because they're thinking what is most convenient for them. So we want to make something that's convenient, attractive, and that will save people time, and maybe that overcomes what they perceive as maybe less convenient, because now they have to walk a block or two to their final destination, or they lose that element of privacy. So as Secretary Wolf discussed, a bus is a vehicle. It happens to have rubber tires instead of steel tires, but you put that vehicle on a dedicated lane, and now you're saving time. And we're gonna do this very soon with our partner MDX on 836. I don't wanna steal your thunder, but we're gonna have express buses on 836 running on the shoulder. Yes. Before the end of this year. And what better marketing tool is there than that, to be stuck in traffic in your car by yourself? Because as Eileen likes to point out, in most cars, you have one person by themselves. That is the cause of congestion, nothing else but that. Everyone wanting to be in the car by themselves. So when you see that express bus just flying by, not stuck in traffic, that's great marketing. That's appealing. People will see as that I want to save time. There might be people that still don't choose that option for a million different reasons, but at least the option is there. So that's where we want to get to with all these corridors. Regarding the studies themselves, the 6 corridors, I'm sure we've seen this map already during the course of the conference. The Kendall corridor is being led by FDOT, and a number of options are on the table. As you can see, one which Secretary Wolf mentioned, which is taking an existing Kendall Drive lane and converting it to a transit-only lane. And you know, the reaction to this at meetings maybe has not been positive, not well received by the public. Something I've learned in this position is it's hard to use the word take. We're going to take a lane. People react very badly to that. You tell them, even the option in the middle with an elevated metro rail, well, we're going to take out the landscaping and the medians and the left turns. Well, people don't react very well to that. And then you get into a bit of a puzzle because this is the most important issue. Everybody wants an option, but you can't take anything away or change anything. So how do we develop something that you know, we can live within our means and give people those options? So something interesting we proposed to FDOT is for Kendall Drive to become a system of reversible lanes. So during rush hour, in the rush direction, you have a dedicated bus lane. You have 3 rush hour direction lanes, but then in the opposing direction, you only have 2 lanes. And you switch that out from AM to PM, but that would require taking out the median, impacting left turn lanes, taking out the landscaping. So we have to balance. There's only so much space in the right-of-way. If you try to expand the right-of-way, now you're buying businesses along Kendall Drive. That's a very expensive proposition. So we have to decide how we're going to prioritize all these competing needs and desires if we're going to give people options. And we're doing that as a community. So that's the most important thing of this conference, of the studies themselves, the public involvement meeting, that we're having these discussions as a community, and that will determine the outcome of what gets selected. So the NEPA process for these studies is spelled out in federal law. If you want federal funds at some point, or you need federal permits, you must follow environmental law, which requires to evaluate the impacts of any of these proposed projects. When there's rail involved, rail has noise, rail has vibration, and therefore the federal law requires a higher level of study, more engagement with the public, analyzing other factors, and in addition to simply what right-of-way is needed or what the costs are. So as long as there's a rail alternative in a corridor study, you're looking at doing at least an environmental assessment or an environmental impact statement. So your study's at least 2 to 3 to potentially 4 years to get through that process. The Northeast Corridor is rail along the existing FEC railroad track. Since there's an existing railroad there, that's a simpler bite regarding the environmental studies. DOT is going to lead that effort for us. Brightline asked for some time to get their service up and running so they can figure out what options they would contemplate beyond their existing service. But that study that I referenced from 1992 said of the Northeast Corridor, it's a no-brainer, do it right away. So we're very fortunate. We collectively invested close to $50 million to build 2 extra platforms in the Brightline downtown Miami Central Station. So that was the most difficult part of that project, perhaps. Where would you have a downtown terminal? Well, with that out of the way, I'm sure that we will collectively work together to get this service up and running very soon. On the North Corridor, goes up 27th Avenue. Again, DOT in the lead. Back in the years of 2005 to 2009, the county was moving forward with the design for an elevated metro rail here, was pursuing federal funds. The county received a record of decision, which means completion of the NEPA study for that alternative. However, financially, it couldn't be accomplished. And so now with the new study, we're looking at a number of alternatives, including metro rail at grade, bus rapid transit, and other options. And I guess we'll have results of that forthcoming. But as long as there's a metro rail option there, the Federal Transit Administration is going to require a higher level of study. So the beach corridor actually connects 3 different segments. So we have, starting at the Design District Midtown area, running down to downtown. So this study has incorporated what was once known as the Miami Streetcar Project. Then the corridor continues across the causeway, and then up to Miami Beach Convention Center, being the third segment within Miami Beach. With this corridor, everything's on the table. And what we've said to the public in the kickoff meetings is that this is not a one-size-fits-all corridor. The ultimate solution here may be a combination of factors. It might be some kind of bus rapid transit or rail across a causeway with maybe a different mode on the beach and maybe a different mode to get to Midtown and the Design District. So we're going to evaluate if there is a mode that fits all three segments, but certainly we're not going to force fit one mode across the three pieces. And we're looking to provide what is more conducive to the original goal of the study when it started in I think late 90s, which is connecting downtown to our largest convention center. On the east-west corridor, this is one where, again, the county is in the lead, like the beach corridor. I have to say the beach corridor is in partnership with FDOT. They're funding half of the study. For the east-west corridor, there was a record of decision in 1998. That was for an elevated metro rail project. And again, I think the cost back then for that was in the $3 billion range. So again, because of inability of getting federal funds, unaffordability, we're doing a new study, and again, everything's on the table. We're looking at express bus rapid transit, rail. We're looking at commuter rail or other new technologies on the CSX line. And we're even looking at Hyperloop, which we were selected by the company called Hyperloop One for them to partner with us on a corridor study between Miami and Orlando. The South Corridor is perhaps the corridor that wins the category of ease of implementation after the Northeast Corridor. Northeast Corridor, obviously the rail is there, so it's just planning and funding the service and building the stations. On the South Corridor, we own the dedicated right-of-way of the South Dade Transitway, 20 miles from our Dadeland Metro Rail Station down to Homestead in Florida City. In talking to the Federal Transit Administration, they looked at this corridor a little differently since it is a dedicated right-of-way. And since we have a busway there already, if we convert this to full bus rapid transit, what does that mean? That means air-conditioned stations at 16 of the largest stops. That means we would have full transit signal coordination, so the buses would get a green light everywhere that they're not stopping at a station. Our air-conditioned stations would have prepayment, so when a bus pulls up, the doors open and everybody just walks on, like if you were walking onto a train. So this is a very practical option for this corridor. For that, the FTA doesn't consider there to be any environmental impacts, and we would really not have to do anything else in terms of an environmental study. Now, however, converting this to a rail corridor, FTA does require the noise and the vibration studies, and at a minimum, an environmental assessment, which takes at least 2 years. If they consider that there are impacts and controversy, then they might require an environmental impact statement, which would be in the 3-year range. But certainly in the conversations with the Federal Transit Administration, since we're talking to them about these 6 corridors, on this corridor, their internal personal recommendation was, why would you convert this to rail when you have so many needs on these other corridors? Just provide the improvements here to make this real bus rapid transit, and you can check one off and use your funds and spread it out to have improvements across the county. And with that, I'll turn it over to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. Next up is the Miami-Dade Expressway Authority, a rather unique agency that's been around now for some years and has demonstrated an amazing ability to build, finance, and maintain highways. I'm really excited that they are now going to bring that same know-how and hopefully funding to expanding transit. With that, a man with a great first name but a better head of hair, Javi Rodriguez, step on up.
Thank you, and Good morning. It's a privilege to be here and speak at I guess it's the third Transportation Summit as organized by the CITT. How many people in the audience, and I may be speaking to, a lot of friends, but how many people know who MDX is? And how many people have no idea who MDX is? And I say this because we just have been running a poll survey of our users, people that use the actual expressway, pay a toll every day. Actually got a refund last year through our cashback program. 75% of those people had no idea which highways are controlled by MDX, which ones are controlled by the state, the county, have no idea. They just want to get from point A to point B. So for those that don't know about MDX, I'll be really brief because I want to get to the question and answer as well. We operate 5 highways in Miami-Dade County. They're all toll facilities. They all go east-west. Grantney on the north, the South Dade Expressway, Don Shula Expressway on the south, the airport, the Dolphin, and the Snapper Creek. That's it. Our primary source of revenue is the tolls. It's a user fee. We do not collect money from the half penny or gas tax, federal, state, any of that. And 100% of our money stays here in Miami-Dade County. So I'm not going to go over a lot of the need for mobility. That's why we're here. You've heard a lot of these statistics over the last couple of days, but I will tell you that State Road 836, when it was planned, it was the 14th Street Tollway. It was in 1961. It was because of the influx of immigrants coming from Cuba. It was never envisioned to handle a community of 2.7 million and over 15 million visitors. So a lot of the deficiencies on 836, which has a lot of curves, is simply because it was never designed and constructed to handle the type of traffic that it has. So here's a little bit about what MDX is engaged in, at least in the 11 years that I've been at MDX. In 2007, 2008, we created a master plan. That master plan looked at our entire network, and it had 3 principles: connectivity, technology, and transit. And when I said that to my board, they kind of like raised their eyebrows and said, "What do you mean transit?" Well, 25 years ago, I had the privilege, working at the Department of Transportation, to be a project manager on a transit project. It was the original east-west multimodal transit corridor and the Miami Intermodal Center. And I say multimodal because even back then, it wasn't a one-size-fits-all. The actual project that got record of decision in 1998 was a combination of a Metro Rail extension program from the port to West Dade and highway improvements, operational improvements on the expressway. So when we talk about studies and that we just do studies and studies, I would argue that MDX is carrying out the vision of that study that was approved in 1998. We're building a lot of the highway improvements on 836. And if you take a look at the slide and you start at the east, we're partnering with the Florida Department of Transportation on the 836 I-395 improvements. If you move further west between 17th Avenue and 57th Avenue, we're improving 3 interchanges at 27th, Lejeune, and 57th. But the key to this is that while we're constructing it, and I have a slide that I'll show you, we are preparing it to handle express bus transit on the inside shoulder. If you go further west, we are partnering with the county and the state, and we're building the Dolphin Park and Ride, state-of-the-art facility where a lot of the express bus service would originate. But not only there, partnering with FIU's Panther Station and the county's Tamiami Trail at 147th Avenue Station, now you're starting to see options, as Alice said. And then hopefully in the future, we'd have the extension of 836, or as Mayor Board Member Jimenez mentioned yesterday, the Kendall Parkway. And I'll get into that a little bit further. But our projects don't stop on 836. On 874, we're also extending the expressway. It's under construction. Everything that I'm mentioning now is under construction. We're extending the expressway over the turnpike to connect it out to the Kendall-Tamiami Airport. Keep that in mind as we continue to talk about networks. On the north end, the master plan back in 2008 talked about finalizing major system-to-system connections and fixing operational access issues. So on the north end of the county, the Gratney, it doesn't connect to the turnpike and it doesn't connect to I-95. So we looked at connecting both. The connection to the west is completed. The connection to the west, the environmental studies are completed. It is funded and financed for construction this year to connect to the turnpike. We're still in the NEPA process, environmental process of connecting it to the east. And on State Road 112, the board has authorized us to finance and fund a full revamp of State Road 112 from a safety perspective. It's the one highway that has no shoulders. It's the one highway that is not up to safety standards. If you build the shoulders, then you also have the ability to run express buses on that facility. But, okay, we're building all of this, and we're under construction. What's our real vision? What's the real reason why we do this? It would behoove me not to give you a glimpse of what MDX is looking at in the future. When we look at our long-range transportation plans, and we look at the SMART plan, we have to ask ourselves, how do these two things integrate? You've seen these maps. You've seen these maps over and over. In 2016, MDX completed an update to our master plan. We called it our strategic master plan. I'll summarize it like this. It was a spoke and hub concept, where the spokes were transit, transportation, multimodal hubs, and those were the hubs. The spokes were our highway network. Not only MDX's highway network, but the Florida DOT's highway network with the managed lane network. So if you look at this and you look at the spokes and you say we've got Metro Rail, that's a spoke. You've got an entire interconnected highway network. Why can't we interconnect this with hubs and run some other form of mass transit on it? And that's really what our strategic master plan said. So we're moving towards that end. Now, a glimpse even further into the future. Currently, we're in the project development environment phase of the Kendall Parkway. Over 650,000 people live west of Florida's Turnpike, south of Miami Trail. And they don't have access. They have to fight 1 hour or more just to get to Florida's Turnpike. Many of them have chosen to go west to the Chrome Avenue. And the department has had to widen Chrome Avenue and make it safer. So we're looking at a project that would potentially extend the expressway west and south for about 14 miles, all the way down to the Kendall-Miami Airport. But it's not just a highway project. It can't just be a highway project. It is a combination of a 4 or 6 lane highway. It will have a shared use path, very similar to what MDX has on 836 between 87th Avenue and 107th Avenue, our Kitty Rodell bike path. So we're planning on having that the entire length of the facility. We're also leaving envelopes for future rail transit. Doesn't matter the technology. Those are conversations that are yet to be concluded. But on the highway itself, you will have the inside shoulder full lane dedicated for express buses. So on day one, you will have a network of express buses that can go all the way down to South Dade. What we're doing as part of that project is locating stations along the corridor and making a commitment to build them. Those stations must be state-of-the-art. As you heard yesterday by the mayor, the chairman, and Mayor Gilbert, it's not just enough to promise, you have to do. So these stations have to be state-of-the-art stations. I don't know when technology is coming, but I know it's here. I know that 8 years ago, we didn't depend on our iPhones as much as we have today. We had laptops, then we got iPads. Now we don't need any of that. We have our iPhone and we're good to go. So is the advent of technology going to come 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 or more? It doesn't matter. The question for a highway operator, toll operator, a transportation operator is, are we preparing ourselves to accept that? And the answer is yes. The entire highway network at MDX is prepared to accept technology in the future. These stations also have to accept that technology. The technology could be fixed rail, it could be express bus, it could be autonomous, it really doesn't matter. They need to be transportation hubs. One of the, and just to show you a picture of what our concept of our express buses would work is, if you look at it, you've heard a lot of the shared ride, private rides, so on and so forth. If you look at the expressway as a trunk line, and you say that that trunk line is going to have dedicated express bus service, and you have transportation hubs at each end or in the middle, then the question is, how do you connect them? And how do you provide the user choices so that, just like I said when we were looking at the express lanes on 95 years and years and years ago, January 10th of 2007, I asked an audience similar years to you, how many of you would choose to take would pay to go from downtown Miami to downtown Fort Lauderdale in 30 minutes? And everybody in the audience raised their hands. Everyone did, because they wanted choices. There were no choices back then. So what we say is, if we prepare the groundwork, then people will have chances to take choices. And that's what Alice and Eileen and Secretary Wolf are working on, is developing those choices. What does 836 look like? This is what's under construction right now. If you look at the facility, it will have a wide inside shoulder. Most highways don't have inside and outside shoulders full width. Typically, you have the outside shoulder 10 feet, the inside 4 to 6. We chose here to add $45 million to our construction to have full width shoulders inside and out. And then we decided that we would dedicate that inside lane as an XT lane. We call it XT, Express Technology. Technology can use it, or express buses. We're going to use express buses this year. You'll see express buses operating on 836. That construction should be completed later this fall. We will be putting out an RFP for all those operators and vendors out there listening. We will be putting an RFP out to provide private sector service on 836 that will operate this. I'm not an expert. There's a lot of experts out there. And maybe what we are going to do at MDX is provide the private sector the assets that we have and ask them for the best business plan to make it work. Because it's not our intent at MDX to take a current transit rider and just put them on our service, because that would just be taking from one pocket and putting it in the other. The challenge here is, as Secretary Wolf said, how do you get 79% of the people who drive by themselves to have a viable option to get out of their car and take some form of mass transit? It's the only way we'll survive in Miami-Dade County. I can't widen 836 anymore, and I cannot double deck it. That's just a fact. So how are we going to deal with the growth? And how are we going to deal with the reality that 95 or 97% of the people drive their cars today? So it's a balancing act. As I mentioned earlier, the plan is to originate our service at the Dolphin Park and Ride and service the Miami Intermodal Center and downtown. But we can also originate the service either at the Tamiami station along Tamiami Trail or at the FIU Panther station. The point is, give people choices. And as the system expands, expand it along. The features, we want premium, reliable, and sustainable service. We've talked about allowing rideshare services to get on it. As Mayor Ferre, my former board member and chairman, used to say, you know, MDX is like an airport. Just build the runways, build the terminals, and allow the airlines to use it and land on it. So if you look at our network as the landing strips, and you look at the transportation hubs as our terminals, then multiple users can be using that asset rather than just being empty. I'm going to speed along because I know that we want to get into some of the questions. But it doesn't end here. And I'd be remiss to say that Commissioner Moss, who's been a champion of express buses for a while, and we made a commitment back in 2007 to allow buses to ride on shoulders. And I see Isela in the audience, and it was wildly successful on the Don Shula Expressway. We're planning on expanding that service along Snapper Creek to service the Dadeland North Metro Rail station. And the way we're going to make it work even better is provide direct ramps from Snapper Creek to the parking garage itself. That's in our program. It is going to go under construction fairly soon. And then to the west, you'll be able to go out all the way to Kendalltown, Miami. So it's a matter of locating the hubs. So why is this important? Like I said, we don't know what the vehicles will look like. We don't know if it's going to be a rubber tire autonomous vehicle, if it's going to be a maglev vehicle, if it's going to be a fixed steel wheel on steel wheel. It really doesn't matter. Did you provide the infrastructure to accommodate it? Is it going to be a public-private arrangement? You heard many options, many ideas on public-private. I consider MDX a public-public arrangement with the state of Florida, Miami-Dade County. So how do we integrate in the future is incredibly important. And I'll just stop there because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Javi. I was privileged enough when I started my career as an urban planner to start at the South Florida Regional Planning Council, who I know is here in the audience. Hi, Isabel. And I say that because although I then moved on to work at the county, the city, district levels, I always was able to carry that regional perspective with me. Much as Eileen said, we don't work, live, and play in the same commission district. We obviously travel throughout the county. We don't live and work and play in just one county. There are many people who live in one, work in the other. We visit the other, entertainment facilities. We have family and friends. We need to connect and move throughout the region. And the agency charged with making sure that we're able to do that is the South Florida Regional Transportation Authority. You may know them as Tri-Rail, obviously one of the services they provide. And with that, I will ask the Michael Oglesby, who's the Deputy Director of the SFRTA, to join us. Thank you.
Okay, let's see if I can do this. I've got a monitor there. We got one back there. Okay. Well, first of all, let me start by saying that it's too bad that I'm between you and your meal. So I won't say lasagna too many times, okay? Lasagna. Okay, these are some of the things that I'm going to go over. First, I'm going to talk about our current service, Tri-Rail Downtown Miami Link, which is very important because that's our anchor, the potential of the Northeast Corridor that Alice had mentioned, and how we could potentially participate in the Tri-Rail Coastal Link. See how fast that zipped over there? I'll try to speed it up. Okay, a little bit about our service. We began in 1989. We have 72 miles. We are a 72-mile system with 145.2 miles of track, 18 stations. We have 50 trains per day during the weekday and 30 trains on the weekend. And mainline speeds between 20 and 79 miles per hour. A little slower. Okay, that's safer. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Downtown Miami Link. It's very important to us because it's the anchor of our future. All Aboard Florida announced the intent to reintroduce passenger service on the FEC corridor, and it presented a unique public-private partnership that anchors our ability to go for Tri-Rail to operate on the FEC corridor, and more importantly, have us move forward with Tri-Rail Coastal Link, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Now, one of the reasons why I wanted to put this slide up is because we're going to be changing our layout to the blue line and the gold line, with the blue line going into the Miami Airport, which we currently have now, as you see, Golden Glades, Opelika, Metro Rail Transfer Station, a Hialeah Market, and then into Miami Airport. That's existing now. The gold is where it veers off. I don't have a pointer, but if you watch the gold all the way down and it starts veering off to the Iris over the Little River and then down into Miami Central. This is the hub. Everybody sees it in various stages. On my way here, I saw that it looks like it's coming along nicely, and it spans over 6 downtown city blocks. It connects Tri-Rail, Brightline, Metro Rail, Metro Mover, and Metro Bus. And one of the big things about it is the retail, restaurants, and residential, and all of those options. This is the slice of the pie. To your To your left, I had to check. To your left, that's the tri-rail portion. So if you take a look at this slide, to the left there are 2 platforms. That's tri-rail. I showed you where we'd be going across the Iris into downtown, and then All Aboard Florida is to the right with 3. It's a unique opportunity to go shopping. If you look down at the bottom, I would probably put a few more cars downtown, but that's what we got. I will tell you that we're really excited because this is the anchor in our future. I wanted to put the funding partners up here, and it's very important because Miami came out in full force as far as moving forward with this $70 million project. When we first started out, we really didn't know which way we were going to go, and we traveled around and pitched what we were intending to do, and all of the funding partners bought in. So it's a public-private partnership. I wanted to show you this slide because these are the numbers that we're talking about. Southeast Overtown put in 17.5, Omni CRA 3.7, City of Miami 8 million. It goes on and on. Bayfront Trust 250, and though it only says 250 there, I believe they contributed the most as it relates to their budget. So that just goes to show you how serious this got. And then, of course, Miami-Dade County, 13.9 million. Now, the list below, with positive train control at 3.1 and the 5 million for SFRTA, we had intended on moving forward with. We already intended on putting that much in. We were expecting to get some additional FDOT funds. When that didn't come to fruition, the board got together and made a decision. And we put our future into this station. We were able to shift around some capital projects and some unallocated funds to be able to come up with $17.1 million and move this forward. So I wanted to show you this because there were no state and federal funds involved. And when you erase that and you include the public-private partnership, things get done a lot quicker, as you see. This is an important slide. I'm actually going to read it. All Aboard Florida is a project lead. They provided prime land downtown. They took the responsibility for any cost overruns. They gave us a one-time access fee of $1 million, which is extremely cheap for those who are familiar with trying to negotiate the access fee. I believe Alice will be in the process of doing that once we get back into negotiations with the Northeast Corridor, and the total contributions are well in excess of $25 million. So what is it going to do? It's going to improve rail mobility, South Florida region, and enhance connectivity to the existing service into downtown, and provide a one-seat ride from the north all the way to the south. It'll be a cost-effective and strategic transit solution for Miami-Dade County, and we have public and private funds to leverage the investment. So what are the other possibilities? It was already mentioned that we could potentially provide the transportation, and if we didn't provide the transportation, we'd be in full support because I think that all of our systems complement each other. But if you take a look at this slide, there, including Miami Central, there are 6 potential locations. These are just potential locations identified to be able to provide the transportation. We're really interested in it because it's sort of phase 1 of Tri-Rail Coastal Link. One of the things that we did is we took a look at the cost. So we're very cost effective. I mean, if we provided this transportation, I believe our operating and maintenance costs would be about $12 million for 30-minute peak, 60-minute non-peak, and then for 30-minute peak and 30-minute non-peak, it would be around $18 million. So you're talking about a $6 million delta for something that's pretty impressive. Also, it would require that we'd have to purchase some additional vehicles, so there'd be newer vehicles providing transportation on this section. So that's how we could possibly link into the SMART plan, or as we say in Boston, the SMART plan. No? Okay. It represents the first phase, as I mentioned, of the expansion of the FEC corridor to Aventura, one of 6 Miami-Dade County Smart Plan corridors, and Miami-Dade County is the project lead, of course. So there are 6 proposed stations, and again, that's another option there. Last, the potential of, let's see if we can get this going. Very good. The potential of 85 miles of service from downtown Miami to Jupiter, fully integrated with Tri-Rail, approximately 25 potential stations. This is in its it's frozen right now, and I'll explain a little bit because it goes back to in order to move forward, we have to negotiate the access fee. We were waiting to see what the access fee would be in the Northeast Corridor and potentially utilize that as an option to continue. FDOT is taking the lead on this project. They performed the preliminary environmental, yep, I got it up there. They performed the preliminary environmental work. FDOT's fully funded the project development phase of the state funds, and it could be completed within 18 to 24 months, but it's currently on hold right now. So I'll end that by saying something very simple. Next stop, downtown Miami. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you to all of our amazing panelists. How about another round of applause for the entire bunch? We are really quite blessed to have all these professionals. These are your battlefield commanders. They're where the rubber or the steel hits the road. They're the ones that are going to plan, build, and operate our expanded system. So they are essential to all of this, and we're very lucky to have them with us. At this point, I'm going to open it up to Q&A. I had like 10 questions, but I want to give you an opportunity to ask as many questions as you can. But I will actually, if it's okay, ask the first one, and then I will open it up to everyone. Let's fast forward for a second, 5, 10 years. All 6 corridors have been built and are operating nicely. The BERT system has been put in place. But even under that optimistic scenario, we're still not reaching the bulk of the population directly. There needs to be, in addition to these wonderful corridors, an interconnected, comprehensive, first, last mile solution. What are we doing as part of our planning of the corridors to make sure that that first, last mile is going to be part of the SMART plan? And that question will probably start with Eileen and Alice and anyone else who wants to chime in. Thank you.
So the TPO is starting the 2045 long-range update that will be completed next year. And you highlight a good point because in the future, in 10 years, when we do have this well implemented, we're going to be in probably finishing SMART Plan 2 and or kicking off SMART Plan 3. And what I mean by that is that you have the northwest quadrant of the county, which is exponentially growing. And then you have all of the east-west arterial corridors that have to be connected to the base network, which is SMART Plan. So what we're looking at today is the build-out of the base network that we've been talking about for decades. And then SMART Plan 2 is connecting the other areas of the county that are not yet plugged into it. SMART Plan 3, fortifying with all the east-west connectivity. First last mile is today. We have a concerted effort today on all 6 corridors with the implementation plan. We're working very closely with Alice, with FDOT, with MDX on very innovative approaches as to how we can start service now, on-demand mobility, pedestrian bicycle, special transportation disadvantaged needs. We want to make sure that's incorporated now as we're building out the 6 corridors. But don't forget that in the future, 10 years from now, we're well into SMART Plan 2 and or SMART Plan 3.
Okay. Alice and then Secretary Wolf.
I think you see all kinds of solutions already happening. And some with our assistance and some without. If you look at the ride-sharing services that are out there, for example, like Uber, Lyft, they've reported back to us that say, east of I-95, the percentage of time that they have 3 people in the car is through the roof, a very high percentage, and they're working to see how they market that further west So obviously that's people connecting with other things, not having a car, not circling for traffic, and they're sharing the ride, so they're getting cars off the road. So we ourselves, working with the TPO, we're going to work on this flexible route circulator system, but that really would mimic what an Uber pool service does. It's an app hailing the vehicle. And this is also what we're hearing from car manufacturers. We're having very high-level conversations with car manufacturers are basically working to produce either shuttles or autonomous vehicles and kind of cut out the middleman and be the service provider themselves. They see that as the future of the industry, where people aren't necessarily going to own their own car, but it's going to be more and more ride sharing.
Okay. Secretary?
Yeah, I have some 20-something sons. Maybe I can relate a little bit to young people. And I think what they want is to pick up their cell phone and have it solve their problems. And I think it's very, someone has sons too? Okay. I think it's very reasonable that people will take their cell phone and call it up and ask for a mobility solution. And that is, I'm here, I want to be here. And the phone will connect with a service, and it'll say, well, you're going to need to walk half a block, no big deal. Catch this premium transit. It's going to arrive at this particular time. When you get to the other end, you're going to need an Uber. I'll call that for you. They'll be waiting for you when you get off the bus. And you say yes, no, you do it. And there's an expectation that things are going to be that easy and integrated. And it's not unrealistic to think that that's going to happen, but part of it is, how do you integrate privately delivered services with government-provided services when they are all components of a single trip? Who manages that integrating program? I'm sure it ends up being government, but a lot of the delivery is going to be private. So it's going to be interesting to see how we solve that problem. But this is all part of making transit an option that is both convenient and economical and desirable. We need to present that to people, and we'll get that 79%. Maybe not even to be in any vehicle, but take those transit options.
So I'm glad to hear that you're on it, that you're actively thinking about it, and that you see this as a complement to the system. Some people believe that it is something that can be done in lieu of the system, but it really needs to work together, and I think we all agree. With that, we're going to open it up to the public. I know we're nearing noon, but I think we could go a little over if you're okay with that on the panel.
Yes, good morning. Thank you very much. My question is sort of a follow-up to yours. Presentation states that 95% of those who own cars are riding them on the, as a mode of transit, transit on the highways, and that 80% of people have to commute to work, right? My concern are for those who don't own cars. I've never seen anything referring to those in our county who are transit dependent, who depend on transit to get to work, and how your wonderful network of connectors and transportation connects communities that are hard hit with unemployment, underemployment, are connected to these work destinations. I don't know that downtown is the new, is where, work is, employment is, refining employment. So I'm just wondering how much you take into consideration the transit-dependent and underemployed and unemployed communities in this county, which to some extent I've seen left out of these wonderful plans.
Actually, a lot of consideration was given to those points. And you're right, when you look at maps of projections where employment is going to grow in Dade County over the next 30 years, it's everywhere. It's not concentrated in one particular area. And I think that's a byproduct of we having a low-density development pattern right now, and as it fills in, that's why the employment is spread out. But when we laid out the SMART plan, If you draw a 2-mile radius around each of the corridors, together you capture 1.7 million people out of our 2.7 million. So about 2/3 of our population would be within a 2-mile radius of these corridors. So that's significant, and it actually captures 85% of employed or working population. So this plan, it's a gateway to opportunity. We talk about affordable housing in our community. Well, having very good transportation, effective transportation, and cutting down the travel times is in essence making sure that everyone that lives in an affordable area has access to education and employment. And when you look at today, I'll take one example. We plotted out what the travel times are on the 6 corridors. The South Dade corridor is probably the best example. If you drive from Florida City or Homestead to downtown for employment, that takes about 2.5 hours each day, each way. So yes, South Dade, we have affordable housing, but is it practical for someone to spend 4 hours a day commuting to and from work? So we think with an implemented South Corridor, with any of the options we discuss, that travel time could be reduced to just over an hour. So now you've effectively shrunk the size of Dade County, and suddenly living anywhere becomes convenient and conducive to having access to education and employment.
Okay. Thank you, Alice. Thank you. I believe someone has a microphone in the back, please. Barbara? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. All great points. We really need to follow the order of who has the microphone so that they can pick it up.
And don't forget over here.
Thank you. Barbara?
One thing that has not been addressed, we have a lot of great trolley systems within the municipalities. And overall, I think they really serve a very good purpose because they service underserviced areas. But my complaint is they also duplicate service and put more traffic on the streets downtown. And I know that most of them, or maybe all of them, are being paid for with the half-cent, the municipal portion of the half-cent. And I know that the county was not supposed to tell the municipalities how to use that half-cent. But can't there be some kind of coordination so that we don't duplicate service? I mean, we've got Metro Rail and Metro Mover, and then we've got the Brickell trolley competing with that. And I have seen as many as 3 trolleys tied up at the bridge. They're riding for free, but I'm on the Mover also for free, and I'm waving at them. I mean, we need a little coordination there. Could you address what we can do?
Any trolley route that runs in Miami-Dade County is because they have an agreement that's been authorized by our county commission. So we coordinate with them the planning of their routes, and when the municipality wants to do a route that's very similar to one of ours, what we do is reshape our service and use it more effectively so that our resources are maximized, and then we complement each other. And I'll give you an example. When the city of Miami planned a trolley route on Coral Way with multiple stops, we turned our Dade County bus route into an express route through that area. So anybody with local stops could use the trolley circulator, and then if they were going for the long haul, they could transfer to the county route. And that's where we want to focus. Our routes ideally on the major arterials, not going into neighborhoods with large buses, and that way we can improve the frequency on the large arterials and have better service that way.
Mr. Secretary.
I'd like to back up to the woman on the aisle there. I think you were a little frustrated getting your message across without a microphone. But my understanding was that you were talking about developing a neighborhood sense of place. And in a downtown area, I hope I got it right. In a downtown area, much of your space that is not building footprints is in fact the transportation network. And there's already been reference here to the underline. That's an asset to be developed that creates a sense of place while it still has transportation going on overhead and perhaps bicycle paths on the bottom. We're looking at the 836 with the Signature Bridge project and creating park-like areas underneath the structures, and the structures being higher, more airy. All of these things, and then I go back to the Brickell City Center comments that Swire Properties was talking about, and they looked at the adjacent areas to their residential tower and said, how do we create a sense of place, something desirable, a dog walk? We need public spaces that people are comfortable with walking. That's one of the limitations of transit. Are you comfortable with how you get to it? Do you like the neighborhood? And transportation and our modes can be a driver for something that we don't want, or it can be a driver for something in the community that we want to develop, and it needs to fit.
Thank you, sir. I think we have time for two last questions. We have one here.
Can't really hear you,
We
Madam.
appreciate
So-
that. Other people are waiting patiently
Yes.
for their turn, please.
Didn't get in the neighborhood because basically there wasn't anybody occupying the Dade County building of a community center, and education and public television and college students who aspire to be public servants weren't really in-house knowing that people are infringed inside the neighborhoods, even with landlords, not necessarily at code compliance to the building, and we just really could actually be more connected. Trolleys designated to every library and community center.
And with that, I'd like to transition because
thank you.
that is definitely the words and sentiments of my heart, madam. Madam, when you said trolley, some of the most disconnected persons. I'm Madam Renita Holmes. This is Nyla, and Nyla's having an anxiety issue. Some of that has a lot to do with connecting and making public forums and transportation lines and spaces a lot more aware of what persons challenged with disabilities are going through, even workforce. As the organizer for a wave of women in public housing, transit development, I'd like to acknowledge Madam Bouclé and the CITT, as well as Madam Bravo. We have a Harriet Tubman initiative with the Women's Foundation, Women in Transportation. It's so vitally important because nowadays many of our children are traveling, and many of our children with disabilities as well as ourselves with disability. I like what you said about making it comfortable and making it convenient. The transition in public-private in many industries always leaves us with having the public oversight responsibility that employees have. And honestly, in plain English, that means I'm very concerned about losing drivers with experience, education, and training that are commanded and demanded to respect pregnant women riding on buses, as well as persons with disability. In the African-American inner city community, when trolleys receive ultimate complaints or there is no notice of ADA handicap or drivers hardly speak the same language or they don't, my concern is this transition. More than just losing jobs, but losing educated employees that will commit to make it more convenient, changing, accessible. And so with that, I ask you this transitioning question, and I hope that I hear some response for the women in housing, Madam Bouclé and Madam Bravo, as well as this fine gentleman who touched a lot of our sentiments and concerns. How do we as the public, as private partners or partners in P3, guarantee that there's a sustainable outreach, sustainable in-reach, sustainable information from us, because I know Miami-Dade strives for excellence, and hearing from us as riders can allow us to get rid of the glitches. How can we have more input about the aesthetics, not just the building of the physical parts of it? How can we participate as persons with disability that are most challenged to ride these, who are most in need of this great system to connect, to reassure us that we won't continue to have an increase of complaints of our ridership, that we will have more notability of what our issues are, and that we will have some sunshine and some equal justice when it comes to input, particularly those of us in poor neighborhoods and disenfranchised communities. I leave you before I give you back your mic. I'm a lobbyist, an organizer, an advocate, a taxpayer, a resident, a rider, a mother, and Nyla is the benefactor of all of those things because she has no voice. It has been the ability to walk into and to be invited to and to bring other persons here that made the big difference. And I'm really sincere about thanking you. But if you want to be more specific, there is a Poinciana Park project which we went up in wheelchairs, we went on walkers up to Tallahassee to talk about because it adds an economic opportunity. By the way, I might be disabled and handicapped, a leg full of steel and a body full of lead, but what about us veterans and urban planners that really are entitled to have a great opportunity? I want you to keep that in mind as a rhetorical question, but then again, would you please address that?
Thank you. We're running out of time, so if it could be brief so we can get the last question in, and then we'll have to wrap up. Thank you.
We always run out of time when it gets to the persons with disability. I just want to make a note about patterns and trends. We have the last voice, but we have the most challenge. So please let them be thorough to us.
Does someone have an answer to a question?
About the inclusion of the public in the say-so, the planning, and the development, as well as the points targeting those specific jobs in the most disparate, specific transportation projects. As you know, Poinciana Park is an intermodal. It is on the county's agenda. It is in the poorest community, and I seem to be the only one that talks about it. The fact that I'm African-American, disabled, and a planner that's not getting the jobs or not connected to the developers says a lot. So maybe you can relate and identify from my perspective. Thank you.
Well, I think the top way to address your question is that we work with our county commissioners that are dealing directly with their constituents and are familiar with the particulars of certain areas and the different centers that we should address with our routes. So I think that's the best way to get that feedback. With regards to disabilities, we follow every ADA requirement in planning our routes and the purchase of our equipment. So I think that's an area where we get a good grade.
Actually, Madam Bravo, and if I may, to make it more clear for persons with disability, they don't always make it to conferences annually. Your CITT put on a great program in this is the cultural competence of it, which I think is vitally important when you're talking about entitlement groups, handicap, persons low income, all the people that you hear people sitting down advocating about. And my leg is getting tired. I'm saying that my commissioner has to ride the route. My commissioner sometimes does not even ride a bus. Not all my commissioners are disabled, and sometimes the employees themselves should not have to wait to go to a commissioner. They have a union. Why am I having to go through so many different councils to participate in employment, planning, and ridership? I've got some answers for you from Wave of Women, and I won't delay you any further, but evidently by your lack of response, the response says we need to be more connected. I'm an expert on where I go, how I get there, and where you build it, because it's right there in my community. Thank you so kindly.
Thank you. And I know there are many other questions and comments. I'm sure our panelists are going to stay afterwards, and we can continue to speak with them one-on-one. Please, very brief question, very brief answer. We have to close out. Thank you.
Ms. Bravo, I'm glad that you said, I live in Homestead, but I'm glad that you mentioned the time it takes us to get up here to Miami. You said 4 hours. It actually takes us a little bit more throughout the day, especially if you have to go to different meetings throughout the county. However, I question your reason as to why we should continue leaving the busway and use express buses to use that money that's going to be spent there for improvements throughout the county. When the citizens from even the Keys, Florida City, Homestead, Color Bay will not be able to use the improvements around the county. They will not be able to take advantage of those coming to games, maybe at the Miami Arena or other ventures around the county. We're not going to be able to use those improvements. And we have been paying the taxes to be able to get a train. So my question to you is, do we not deserve a train down in the south that connects us to everything else up here in the north?
Well, if you listen to my presentation, I didn't say we would do trains on the other corridors. I think what we have to look at is, you know, if there's one alternative that can move as many people and move them as quickly and give them the time savings, and that's bus rapid transit. And we can provide a similar level of service as rail, but the bus rapid transit costs a fourth or a third. Maybe that's the solution we should be looking at all of our corridors. That way, instead of putting our halves and sales tax all on one corridor and then not doing anywhere else, let's provide that efficient and effective option everywhere. And then we build on top of that. If you look at cities like Los Angeles, they tax themselves much more than we do, and yet they have to take that practical approach because they're trying to address their entire community and not just put all their resources in one area. That's what I meant by that.
Thank you. And let me just finish. The technologies have not been selected for each of these corridors. There are planning, design, and engineering, PD&E efforts underway for each of the corridors that's ultimately going to recommend which technology, which mode of transportation for that corridor. Those are all very publicly oriented efforts. If you see the boards along the sides provided by the TPO, they'll show you where they are in the process, and there are a number of opportunities for community engagement for the community to help determine what those modes, what those technologies should be. So I encourage everyone to be involved, not only here at the summit at this kind of big picture level, but very much on a corridor by corridor level. Get involved, speak with our different representatives as to when those community engagement opportunities are, and attend, voice your opinions and your concerns as part of that process. With that, I'm going to turn it over to the esteemed Chaz Skur for some final comments. Thank you, Chaz. One last round of applause for our panel. Excuse me. I'm sorry.
Well, I'll be very brief. I think the professional leadership is here. We need to continue to mobilize the political leadership to continue to move this forward. Real quick thank you to our partners in this, the county, obviously, the chamber, the League of Cities, the TPO, the RTA, Miami-Dade College, FIU. A particular note of thanks to my board and to really an extraordinary CITT staff with Patrice, Joanna, Anna, Naya, Von Tricia, Nestor, and now Javier. But the future is ours. You know, these doors are open. It's not going to happen by itself. You know, there's low-hanging fruit. You know, that doesn't mean it's going to get done. We all need to continue to advocate, continue to move it forward. And thank you for attending our summit. Have a good day.